Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the Solidarity Podcast. Wokeism is dead, wokeism remains dead, and we have killed it. So the right wing media claims, as they celebrate the return of so called common sense, which apparently means abandoning the veiled racism of capitalism for an explicit one. The male white rich men that champion the abolishment of DEI don't seem to explain why, without it, they dominate all positions of power. Although it's not said out loud, claiming a true meritocracy exists while one race and sex dominate these positions is an admission of racism and sexism. If there are no underlying socioeconomic reasons that prevent certain people from reaching the top of the ladder, then the race and gender at the top must be superior to all. Such is the white and male superiority ideals of the right, never said out loud in the modern era, but hidden in their statements and actions. As I talked about it in the last episode, there is no separation of capitalism and the free market from racism, sexism, and homophobia. So let's take a look at the origin of wokeism, its journey, and why we should fight back to reclaim it. In 1938, blues musician Led Belly used the phrase stay woke in a spoken word warning about racial injustice while discussing his song Scottsboro Boys. He advised black people traveling to the South to stay woke and be cautious. Though Leadbelly's use wasn't in the song lyrics, his use of stay woke as a warning laid the foundation for the term's later adoption in black culture in the 21st century. The Scottsboro Boys were nine black teenagers falsely accused of raping two white women in Alabama in 1931. Their trials became one of the most infamous cases of racial injustice in the U.S. history. The boys, aged 13 to 19, were riding a freight train where a fight broke out between black and white passengers. Two white women, Ruby Bates and Victoria Price, later accused them of rape. Despite weak evidence and recanted testimony, all but one were sentenced to death in rushed all white juries. The boys spent years in prison. Some were retried and reconvicted. By the 1950s, however, all were released, but their lives were ruined forever. The term re entered mainstream discourse in the 2000s and the 2010s, particularly through the Black Lives Matter movement, where woke became synonymous with social awareness regarding racial and social injustice. The phrase stay woke regained its recognition through the 2008 song Master Teacher, in which the singer repeatedly repeats it. Now, the right has weaponized the term, turning it into an insult, using it to accuse the left of the very thing they aim to fight. In doing so, they also muddy the water between genuine leftists that fight for a better alternative society by fighting capitalism as the source of these issues and liberals. The people who are all so quick to outrage about the injustices of the past, but not of the present. The liberals that champion feminism in the form of female CEOs or vice presidents, never mind how many women are exploited in the factories by the CEOs or bombed by the vice president. The same people that championed Barack Obama as a victory for the fight against racism, as he deported millions of migrants, bombed thousands of Middle Easterns, and unapologetically embarked in regime change in Libya, Egypt, and Ukraine with devastating effects for the people of the region. So, the task for reclaiming and defending the term woke is twofold, one from the right and two from the liberals. In Moralism versus Antipolitics, Wendy Brown critiques the tendency to replace genuine political engagement with moral judgments, a phenomenon she terms moralism. She argues that moralism simplifies complex political issues into binary categories of good and evil, which can undermine democratic discourse and impede effective political action. By focusing on individual virtue or vice, moralism diverts attention from systematic issues and power structures that require political solutions. Moralism is a depoliticized, judgmental, and individualistic approach to social issues, whereas morality is a broader, politically engaged pursuit of justice and ethical transformation. But the basis for changing the discourse in such a way is quite cynical. It's actually another way for those in power to stay in power. Societal elites engage in a continuous class war to maintain their interest. often utilizing cultural issues to divert attention from economic disparities. Concentration of wealth leads to a concentration of power, and being able to control public discourse is a form of power. This in turn influences legislation and policies that further entrench economic inequalities. This cycle perpetuates a system where the interests of the wealthy are prioritized, while the broader population faces economic challenges. Chomsky also highlights that cultural and ideological tools are employed to shape public perception, thereby diverting attention from systematic economic issues and maintaining the status quo. This can be seen not just in the US, but also in much of the so called developed global north. The affluent working class, also referred to as the middle class, gained much economic advantages in the 50s and 60s in these countries. Just a side note here, even at home, not mentioning the massive colonial and neo-colonial thefts of resources and labor, this was still built upon racism and sexism. For example, black people were not allowed in unions in some cases until as late as the late 60s. In terms of sexism, as I dove into it further in the last episode, the unpaid labor of women, both for maintaining the working force and creating them, played a big role. Anyway, two things greatly changed the luck of the Western affluent worker: globalization and financialization. There was an integration of approximately 2 billion workers into capitalist markets after 1991, following the collapse of the USSR and the rise of China and opening of its markets to the West. This influx led to significant shifts of factories to countries like China, Poland, and various other countries, resulting in job losses and wage stagnation in the US. Union power was eroded. The problem of cost of living was exacerbated by the increasing role and capacity of the financial sector, which, through complex financial instruments and deregulation, shifted power from the industrial sector to finance. This shift led to even more income and wealth inequality, as financial gains were concentrated among the wealthy. One of the places financiers from around the world invested their money in was and continues to be the real estate sector, leading to the insane rent and property prices we struggle through today. However, those who controlled the media and the public discourse, right wing and liberal alike, could neither ignore the problem nor point at its obvious culprits, as they were funded by the very people that were causing this issue. The right blamed immigrants, and the liberals performatively called them racist. The right misled about the origin of the issue, and the liberals denied its very existence. Every time a group from the deindustrialized regions votes for the right wing, they are demonized in liberal media, called ignorant, racist, and maybe in some cases those things are true, but it ignores the underlying reasons for people to be ignorant and racist. Liberal politicians, the Democrats in the US, the Labour Party in the UK, or the Liberal Party in Canada, just as a few examples, have all spent decades and wasted many electoral victories not addressing any economic issues, ensuring that the only people talking about the affluent working class's downfall are the right, with their racist, sexist, and in some cases homophobic language. Thus, a culture war was created to distract from the class war, all this at massive profits for the media companies spreading this war. So the capitalist establishment is increasingly obsessed with the so-called culture war, with right-wing journalists and politicians scaremongering about the woke agenda, while liberals drape rainbow flags on war and austerity and call it liberation. That's why it's important to focus on a class-based approach to fight for the liberation of humanity. But that's not to say we have to back down and surrender, but instead we must reclaim woke and wokeism from the right and the liberals. Trump supporters, for example, might be racist or sexist, but to reduce why they voted for Trump to simple racism or sexism only helps those on top hold on to their power. This is precisely what liberals do. Even if the majority of Trump supporters were racist and hated women, which I'm not saying either is the case or is not, but even if that was the case, racism and sexism have underlying socioeconomic causes. As I hope I have shown here and in my last episode, when we forget the class approach to addressing these underlying issues, we let liberals create Trump in America and the other Trumps. Currently, a similar process is taking place in both Canada and UK, where the establishment liberals, in Canada the Liberal Party and in the UK the Labour Party, are losing their support to the right at an alarming rate. At the 2024 general election in the UK, for example, the Labour Party won with 34% of the vote, while Reform received 14.3% of the vote. However, recent opinion polls show Labour leading with only 27, closely followed by Reform at 26 and the Conservatives at 22. The same situation is happening in Canada with newly shifted to the far right Conservative Party, AFD in Germany, and National Rally in France, just to mention a few examples. This is the danger of the hypocrisy of liberalism. In the case of the US, the policies of previous administrations, particularly under President Obama, contributed to economic disparities that fueled populist sentiment and led to Trump. The aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis saw significant bailouts for Wall Street, while Main Street suffered from austerity measures, leading to widespread disillusionment among the working and middle classes. This economic disenfranchisement created fertile ground for Trump's anti establishment rhetoric and protectionist policies. Trump's economic strategies, including his focus on tariffs and renegotiating trade deals, are responses to the perceived failures of globalization and neoliberal policies that have left many Americans behind. While Trump's approach is not the correct solution, it pretends to address legitimate grievances stemming from decades of economic policy decisions that favored financial elites over the broader population. So, to sum up, we should remain woke. We shouldn't back down or stop using a phrase just because of right wing attacks. They'll attack any word we use. Being woke simply means being hyper aware of injustices around you, be it for self preservation as it started or to promote equality. It is what we do after being aware of these justices that's the issue. The right finds scapegoats for society's problems, and the liberals use hollow moral shields to distract from their complicity in maintaining economic inequalities. However, the ultimate fight is the class war. We should fight for a world where liberation means dismantling the system itself, not just painting it in progressive colors. While doing so, however, we should also recognize the interconnectedness struggle of race, gender, and class within an exploitative system and recognize the importance of fighting against racism, sexism, and all the bad isms and phobias, while remembering their underlying cause, capitalism. As I explained in the last episode, we will never be able to abolish these without abolishing their root cause. Without a class based movement that directly challenges capitalism, liberals will keep creating Trumps and the cycle will continue. Whether in the US, Canada, the UK, or anywhere else, the solution is not to retreat from the fight, but to reclaim it. We should fight for wokeism, not as a buzzword, but as a real force of political resistance.